Good afternoon, class. My name is Dan Bell. I'm your professor for your economics course. And this afternoon I want to talk to you about the supply curve. Hopefully you've watched my first video on the demand curve, and I showed a demand for an individual buyer, a cattle raiser. He needed corn to feed his cattle. Well, the flip side of that is the supplier. Where is he getting the corn? Someone has got to be producing that corn for the farmer to buy and feed his cattle. So today I'm going to talk about the supply curve for a individual supply curve for a producer of corn. In the market, producing that corn utilized for the buyer of the corn to feed his cattle. So let's take a look. What we're looking at here. Here we have quantity. Like on the demand curve, we have quantity, but we have quantity. This would be, we'll put per week, and but this is going to be, we're talking about supplied. Okay, on the demand curve we're talking about demanded per week, but here we have quantity. We'll talk about supply. This price per bushel. Okay. So unlike the demand curve, which was downward sloping, the supply curve is going to be like that. It's going to be upward sloping, indicating that, let's take a look and see what it indicates. Let's start with P1. P1, Q1. Let's take a look at that point. This is a hypothetical. We'll put it for producer 1. Producer 1, okay. What this says, it shows what a producer is willing and able to put on the market at various prices. Here's a series of prices, and here's the quantities that they're willing to put on the market. Well, what is the producer willing and able to put on the market? Well, look, at low price at P1, this producer will only put on the market Q1. But at a higher price, let's call it P3, notice if price were higher, the producer would be willing to put out of the market Q3. In other words, from here, from 0 to all the way out here, or this amount more than Q1. So this higher price brought about this much more quantity that the producers want to put on the market. Why is that the case? Well, a couple of reasons. Think about it intuitively. Higher prices that a producer gets going to be, generally it should hopefully mean more profits if they're keeping their costs under control. Oh, what about those costs under control? Well, think about it. If they're producing more of the output, their costs are going up. They may have to run more electricity, more fertilizer to grow the corn, more laborers to plant the corn, more machinery to operate, to cultivate more land that maybe they hadn't utilized in the past. But the point is, as the output goes up, their costs definitely go up. So they're definitely going to have a higher price. So that's the intuitive reasoning behind the upward sloping supply curve. And there's kind of like what's called a law of supply, like the law of demand. The law of supply, your textbook may mention the law of supply, and that talks about a direct relationship between P and QS. In other words, as the price goes up, from P1 to P3, an increase in price, that leads to an increase in quantity supplied. If the price were to go down, it would work alternatively. A decrease in price will lead to a decrease in quantity supply. So there's a direct relationship between these two variables, price and quantity supply. One goes up, the other goes up. If one were to go down, the other one goes down. In other words, if we're at P4, would be at, let's call it Q4. At P4, the producer would put out Q4. But if the price were P3, if somehow went down, you would move along the supply curve, and you'd be at this point, P3 and Q3. Quantities would go to Q4 rather, to Q3 when the price goes from P4 to P3. So again, you move along the supply curve. So that is the essence of the individual